I thought I knew what betrayal looked like until my husband made his mistress our company's chief customer officer, and suddenly I became the customer nobody wanted to serve. What started as office politics became the catalyst for the most liberating chapter of my life. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why I actually thank Jessica Williams for showing me who I really was beneath 15 years of playing the perfect corporate wife. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 45 I had perfected the art of making everyone else shine while I faded into the background. For 15 years, I'd been the senior marketing director at Pinnacle Digital Solutions, the company my husband Michael and I built together from a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Austin. Back then, we were partners in every sense of the word. I'd handle the creative campaigns while he managed operations, and together we transformed a struggling startup into one of Texas's most respected digital marketing agencies. But somewhere along the way, I became invisible in my own success story. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our Cedar Park home. I was already dressed and reviewing client presentations at the kitchen island when Michael stumbled downstairs, his hair still messy from sleep. He poured himself coffee without acknowledging the fresh blueberry muffins I'd made for the team meeting, the ones that had become a small tradition every Tuesday for the past 3 years. "Sarah, we need to talk about the Morrison account," he said, scrolling through his phone instead of looking at me. "Jessica thinks we should completely rebrand their approach." Jessica Williams. The name had been creeping into our conversations more frequently over the past 6 months. She'd joined our sales team as an account representative, young and ambitious with a smile that seemed to light up every room she entered. Michael had been mentoring her personally, something he claimed was necessary for her rapid learning curve. The Morrison account. I looked up from my laptop, confused. "Michael, I've been managing that relationship for 2 years. We just launched their new campaign last month, and the metrics are exceeding projections by 30%. He finally glanced up, his expression impatient. "Things change, Sarah. Jessica has fresh ideas, and Morrison specifically requested to work with someone who understands their target demographic better." The words hit me like ice water. Morrison Industries was a tech startup founded by entrepreneurs in their 20s, but their actual customer base skewed older professionals in their 30s and 40s who valued reliability over flashy trends. I'd built the entire strategy around this insight, conducting focus groups and analyzing data for months. The campaign's success proved my approach was correct. "What exactly did Jessica propose that's so different from our current strategy?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the tension building in my chest. Michael's jaw tightened slightly. "She suggested modernizing the brand voice, making it more relevant to younger consumers." Morrison loved her presentation. "When did she present to Morris?" I wasn't aware they'd requested a strategy review. "Last Friday." Jessica set up the meeting directly with their CEO. "She's taking initiative, Sarah. That's exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we need from our senior team." Jessica had been with the company for 6 months, while I'd been crafting strategies that built our reputation for over a decade. I'd won industry awards for campaigns that were now hanging in our office lobby, campaigns that helped establish Pinnacle as a leader in authentic brand storytelling. Yet somehow, a junior sales rep was being positioned as more innovative than the woman who'd created most of our foundational marketing frameworks. "I'd like to see her presentation," I said carefully. "As marketing director, I should understand any strategic shifts we're making for existing clients." Michael's expression hardened. "Sarah, you don't need to micromanage every decision. Jessica is perfectly capable of handling client relationships. Maybe it's time you focused on bigger picture thinking instead of getting bogged down in the details of individual accounts." Bigger picture thinking. I almost laughed at the irony. Every big picture strategy our company had successfully implemented had originated from my detailed analysis of market trends, consumer behavior, and brand psychology. I was the one who'd identified the shift toward authentic storytelling 3 years before it became an industry standard. I was the one who'd developed our signature approach to community-based marketing that had doubled our client retention rate. But as I sat there, watching my husband dismiss my concerns while praising another woman's initiative, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in the dynamics of both my marriage and my career. The partnership we'd built together was being rewritten, and I wasn't being consulted about the new terms. Fine, I said quietly, closing my laptop. I'll focus on bigger picture thinking. The drive to our downtown office usually energized me. I loved the bustling energy of Austin's business district, the way the morning sun reflected off the glass buildings, the sense of purpose that came with heading into another day of creative problem solving. But that Tuesday, the familiar route felt different, like I was driving toward a job interview for a position I'd already held for 15 years. Pinnacle Digital Solutions occupied the entire 12th floor of a sleek high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Colorado River. We'd moved into this space 3 years ago, upgrading from a smaller office as our client base expanded. I'd been intimately involved in designing the layout, insisting on an open concept that would encourage collaboration while providing quiet spaces for focused work. The conference rooms were named after Austin landmarks, and I'd personally selected the local artwork that gave the space its warm, creative atmosphere. Walking through those glass doors, I felt like a stranger in a place I'd helped create. "Good morning, Sarah," called Rebecca, our receptionist, her voice bright and welcoming. The team meetings moved to conference room Zilker instead of Ladybird. Michael wanted the larger space. Conference room Zilker was our biggest meeting space, typically reserved for client presentations or all-hands meetings. Our weekly marketing team gatherings usually happened in the smaller conference room Barton Springs, around a table that comfortably seated 8 people. The change suggested either we were expecting more attendees, or Michael wanted a more formal atmosphere. I thanked Rebecca and headed toward the marketing department, passing the sales team's area, where Jessica's desk sat prominently near the window. She wasn't in yet, but her workspace was meticulously organized, with a vision board featuring magazine cutouts of luxury brands and motivational quotes about success. A small succulent plant sat next to her monitor, and I noticed several client files spread across her desk, including one labeled Morrison Industry Strategic Rebrand. The sight of that file made my stomach tight. I'd spent countless hours developing Morrison's brand strategy, conducting interviews with their customers, analyzing their competition, crafting messaging that resonated with their actual audience rather than the audience they thought they wanted to reach. Seeing it reduced to a folder on someone else's desk felt like watching a stranger wear my favorite dress. "Sarah, there you are." Maria Santos, our head graphic designer and my closest friend at the company, appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee. "I brought you your usual. You're going to need the caffeine for this meeting." Maria had been with Pinnacle almost as long as I had, joining the team when we were still operating out of Michael's apartment. She was brilliant at translating marketing concepts into visual stories, and we'd collaborated on dozens of successful campaigns. More importantly, she was the kind of friend who noticed when something was wrong before you said a word. "What do you mean?" I asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. She glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard, then lowered her voice. "Jessica's been in early every day this week, meeting with Michael behind closed doors. Yesterday I saw her carrying presentation boards toward his office, and this morning Rebecca mentioned something about a special announcement during the team meeting." My heart sank, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. "Any idea what kind of announcement?" "Nothing confirmed, but there's been talk about restructuring the client services department. Some people are saying we might be adding new leadership positions." Maria studied my face carefully. "Sarah, you know I'm always in your corner, right? Whatever's happening, we'll figure it out together." Her loyalty meant everything to me, especially as I felt increasingly isolated in my own workplace. Maria understood the creative process, the way great marketing required both analytical thinking and intuitive understanding of human psychology. She'd seen me develop strategies from initial concept to final execution, and she knew the depth of work that went into every successful campaign. "Thanks, Maria. I have a feeling we're all about to learn something interesting about the future of this company." As we walked toward conference room Zilker, I could see through the glass walls that several people were already seated around the large oval table. Michael stood at the head of the room, his posture confident and commanding in the way that had first attracted me when we met at a marketing conference 22 years ago. He was reviewing notes on his tablet, occasionally glancing toward the door as team members filed in. Jessica arrived just as Maria and I entered the conference room, looking polished and professional in a navy blazer that complemented her blonde hair perfectly. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the kind of confidence that suggested she knew something the rest of us did. When Michael looked up and smiled at her, I noticed a warmth in his expression that had been absent from our kitchen conversation that morning. "Good morning, everyone," Michael began once the room filled with our marketing and sales teams, plus several department heads I didn't expect to see at a routine meeting. "I called this gathering because we have some exciting developments to share about Pinnacle's growth and the evolution of our client services strategy." The word evolution made my palms sweat. In corporate speak, evolution often meant someone was about to lose their territory, their authority, or their job. I glanced around the table, noting the mix of curious and anxious expressions on my colleagues' faces. "As you all know, our client base has expanded significantly over the past year," Michael continued. "We're managing larger accounts, more complex campaigns, and developing deeper relationships with brands that require specialized attention. This growth is a testament to the excellent work everyone in this room has contributed." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the table before landing on Jessica, who sat directly to his right in a seat that had traditionally been mine during important meetings. "To better serve our clients and continue our upward trajectory, I'm pleased to announce that..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Creation of a new executive position, Chief Customer Officer. This role will oversee all client relationships, ensure consistent service delivery across accounts, and spearhead our expansion into new market segments. My coffee cup felt heavy in my hands as the implications of his words settled over me. A Chief Customer Officer position would supersede much of what I'd been doing as marketing director. Client relationships had been my domain, the area where I'd built some of our strongest partnerships, through careful attention to each brand's unique needs and challenges. I'm thrilled to announce that Jessica Williams will be stepping into this role, effective immediately. The room erupted in polite applause, but I heard it as if from underwater. Jessica smiled graciously, her cheeks flushed with what appeared to be genuine excitement. She stood briefly to acknowledge the congratulations from our colleagues, her posture radiating the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're rising fast in an organization. "Jessica has demonstrated exceptional insight into client needs and market opportunities," Michael continued. "Her fresh perspective and innovative approach to relationship building make her the perfect choice to lead this new initiative." Fresh perspective, innovative approach. The same phrases he'd used that morning to dismiss my concerns about the Morrison account. I felt Maria's hand touch my arm gently under the table, a small gesture of support that kept me grounded as Michael outlined Jessica's new responsibility. As CCO, Jessica will have direct oversight of all major client accounts, with department heads reporting client-related activities through her office. This structure will ensure consistent communication and allow us to identify cross-selling opportunities more effectively. All major client accounts, including Morrison, including the aerospace company whose campaign had won us a regional marketing award, including the local restaurant chain, whose brand refresh had become a case study taught at the University of Texas Business School. Accounts I'd nurtured from initial pitch to long-term partnership, relationships built on trust, expertise, and countless hours of strategic thinking. "I know this represents a significant change in our operational structure," Michael said, his tone acknowledging the magnitude of what he was announcing. "But change is essential for growth, and I'm confident this new leadership model will position Pinnacle for even greater success in the competitive landscape ahead." Jessica cleared her throat softly, and Michael nodded toward her. "Jessica, would you like to share some thoughts about your vision for the CCO role?" She stood again, her movements graceful and deliberate. "Thank you, Michael. I'm honored by this opportunity, and excited about the potential I see for deeper client engagement across all our accounts." Her voice was clear and professional, with just enough warmth to seem approachable without appearing soft. "My priority will be implementing more dynamic communication strategies that keep us ahead of client needs, rather than simply responding to them. I believe we can transform Pinnacle from a service provider into a true strategic partner for every brand we represent." Strategic partner. Those were the exact words I'd used in my mission statement for the marketing department 3 years ago, the philosophy that had guided every campaign decision and client interaction since then. Hearing Jessica repeat my language as if it were her original insight felt like watching someone claim credit for my life's work. I look forward to collaborating with each of you as we refine our processes and explore new opportunities for innovation. Jessica continued, her gaze moving around the table with practiced confidence. This is an exciting time for all of us. As applause filled the room again, I realized I was witnessing more than a corporate restructuring. This was a carefully orchestrated transfer of power, a redistribution of authority that elevated Jessica while systematically diminishing my role in the company I'd helped build from nothing. Michael resumed control of the meeting, outlining reporting structures and transition timelines, but his words felt distant and surreal. I watched Jessica taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her thorough preparation for this moment. This wasn't a spontaneous promotion based on recent performance. This was a calculated move that had been planned for weeks, possibly months, while I continued my daily work completely unaware that my professional foundation was being quietly dismantled. When the meeting finally ended, colleagues approached Jessica with congratulations and questions about her new role. I remained seated as the room gradually emptied, staring at my reflection in the polished surface of the conference table. Maria lingered nearby, clearly waiting for everyone else to leave before speaking. "Sarah," she said quietly, "are you okay?" I looked up at my friend, this woman who understood the creative passion that drove great marketing, who'd seen me work late into countless evenings perfecting campaigns that had built Pinnacle's reputation. In her eyes I saw the same confusion and concern I felt churning in my chest. "I honestly don't know," I admitted, "but I think I'm about to find out." As we gathered our things and headed back toward our desks, I caught sight of Michael and Jessica standing close together near the windows, their heads bent over documents, speaking in intimate tones that suggested this professional relationship had dimensions I was only beginning to understand. For 15 years I'd been the invisible architect of Pinnacle's success, the strategic mind behind campaigns that won awards and retained clients. But invisibility, I was learning, could quickly transform from an asset into a liability. And in that moment, watching my husband and his new chief customer officer planning the future of my company without me, I realized that being invisible had cost me far more than I'd ever imagined. The question now was whether I had the courage to make myself seen again, or if I'd spent so many years in the background that I'd forgotten how to step into the light. 3 weeks after Jessica's promotion announcement, I learned exactly what being the customer nobody wanted truly meant. It happened at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where Pinnacle traditionally hosted our quarterly client appreciation dinners. I'd organized these events for years, carefully selecting menus that accommodated dietary restrictions, arranging seating that encouraged meaningful conversations, and preparing talking points that highlighted each client's unique success stories with our agents. This particular evening was meant to celebrate our partnership with Davidson Tech, a cybersecurity firm whose brand transformation had been one of my proudest achievements. When they'd first approached us 18 months ago, Davidson was struggling to differentiate themselves in a crowded market dominated by larger competitors. I'd spent weeks interviewing their engineers, understanding their innovative approach to data protection, and crafting messaging that positioned them as the boutique firm that provided personalized security solutions Fortune 500 companies couldn't get elsewhere. The campaign had exceeded every projection. Davidson's client base had grown by 200%, their revenue had tripled, and industry publications had featured their CEO in articles about emerging leaders in cybersecurity. It was exactly the kind of transformative partnership that had built Pinnacle's reputation for strategic thinking and measurable results. But as I arrived at Romano's that evening, I discovered that my role in celebrating this success had been fundamentally altered. "Sarah, wonderful to see you." Mark Davidson, the company's founder and CEO, approached me with the warm smile of someone genuinely pleased to reconnect. He was a soft-spoken engineer in his early 50s, whose passion for protecting digital privacy had motivated him to start his own firm after 20 years at larger corporations. "Mark, congratulations again on the INT magazine feature," I replied, genuinely happy to see him thrive. The article perfectly captured your vision for democratizing enterprise-level security. His eyes lit up with enthusiasm. That interview never would have happened without the messaging strategy you developed. The way you helped us articulate our value proposition, it completely changed how we present ourselves to potential clients. Before I could respond, Jessica appeared beside us, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic of our conversation. She wore a sophisticated black dress that perfectly suited the upscale atmosphere, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in every room she entered. "Mark, I'm so glad you could make it tonight," she said, extending her hand with a smile that managed to be both professional and genuinely warm. "I've been looking forward to discussing some exciting expansion opportunities we've identified for Davidson." Mark shook her hand politely, though I noticed his expression showed slight confusion. Expansion opportunities. Sarah and I just reviewed our strategy last month, and we agreed the current approach was performing ahead of projections. Jessica's smile never wavered, but I caught a brief flash of something calculating in her eyes. Of course, and that success creates the perfect foundation for scaling into new market segments. I've prepared some preliminary research on opportunities in the healthcare and financial services sectors that could significantly accelerate Davidson's growth trajectory. The healthcare and financial services sectors. I felt my stomach tighten as I recognized the direction of her pitch. 6 months ago, during one of our regular strategy sessions, Mark had specifically mentioned those industries as areas he wanted to avoid. Healthcare regulations were complex and constantly changing, while financial services clients often demanded customization that strained smaller firms' resources. We'd agreed to focus on mid-sized technology companies and growing manufacturing firms, markets where Davidson could provide exceptional service without overextending their capabilities. "Jessica," I interjected carefully, "Mark and I had extensive discussions about market focus during our strategic planning. We identified some specific concerns about those particular sectors." Jessica turned toward me with an expression of polite interest that somehow managed to convey dismissal. "Sarah, I appreciate your historical perspective, but market conditions evolve rapidly in the technology sector. What might have seemed challenging 6 months ago could represent significant opportunities today." Historical perspective. The phrase stung with its implication that my insights were outdated, that my understanding of Davidson's business was somehow less relevant than Jessica's theoretical analysis of market trends. Mark looked between us, clearly sensing the underlying tension. "I'd certainly be interested in hearing about new opportunities, but I value the cautious approach Sarah and I developed. Davidson's growth has been sustainable precisely because we've been selective about the markets we enter." "Absolutely," Jessica agreed smoothly. "Sustainability is crucial, which is why I've prepared a comprehensive risk assessment for each potential market segment. My analysis suggests that with proper preparation and strategic positioning, Davidson could capture significant market share in both healthcare and financial services while maintaining the personalized service that defines your brand." I watched this exchange with growing unease, recognizing a pattern I'd seen in corporate environments before. Jessica was positioning herself as the forward-thinking strategist while subtly characterizing my approach as overly conservative. She wasn't directly contradicting my recommendations, but she was reframing them as limitations rather than carefully considered boundaries. "Why don't we find our table?" Jessica suggested, placing her hand lightly on Mark's arm in a gesture that was professional yet somehow possessive. "I'd love to show you some of the preliminary market research over dinner." As we moved toward the dining area, I noticed the seating arrangement had been altered from my original plan. Instead of the round tables that encouraged group conversation, Romano's staff had set up a long rectangular table with Jessica positioned at the center, flanked by our most important client. I found myself seated near the end, between Maria and a representative from our smallest account, a local bakery whose modest marketing budget couldn't compare to the 6-figure contracts that dominated the evening's guest list. Michael arrived just as we were being seated, apologizing for running late due to a conference call with a potential new client. He took his place at the head of the table, directly across from Jessica, and I watched him scan the room with the satisfaction of a man surveying his successful domain. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice carrying the authority that had made him an effective leader during Pinnacle's early years. These quarterly gatherings give us the opportunity to celebrate our partnerships and look ahead to the exciting challenges we'll tackle together. He gestured toward Jessica with obvious pride. As you know, we recently restructured our client services approach under Jessica's leadership as Chief Customer Officer. The insights she's already provided have opened new possibilities for strategic growth across all our accounts. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as several clients turned toward Jessica with expressions of interest and respect. These were relationships I'd built through months of careful attention, understanding each client's unique challenges, and developing solutions that addressed their specific needs. Yet the evening's narrative was positioning Jessica as the architect of their success. Jessica, would you like to share some of the innovations you're implementing? Michael asked, his tone suggesting this was a planned moment rather than a spontaneous invitation. Jessica stood gracefully, commanding attention from everyone at the table. Thank you, Michael. I'm excited about the opportunity to deepen our partnerships with each of your organizations through more integrated strategic thinking. She pulled out a sleek tablet and began displaying charts and graphs that I hadn't seen before. One of my first initiatives as CCO has been conducting comprehensive market analysis for each client, identifying expansion opportunities that align with current brand positioning while opening new revenue streams. The charts were professionally designed and impressively detailed, showing market projections, competitive landscapes, and growth potential across various industry sectors. I had to admit the research appeared thorough, even if I disagreed with some of the underlying assumptions about client capabilities and market readiness. For example, Jessica continued, Davidson Tech's success in the mid-market technology sector positions them perfectly for expansion into healthcare cybersecurity, a market segment experiencing unprecedented growth due to recent regulatory changes. Mark leaned forward with interest, drawn in by the compelling presentation despite his earlier reservations. The numbers are certainly impressive. What kind of timeline are you envisioning for market entry? That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking that excites me about working with Jessica, said Amanda Chen, CEO of Meridian Manufacturing, one of our longest-standing clients. She's looking beyond current success to identify tomorrow's opportunity. I felt a sharp pang of irony at Amanda's comment. Chen Industries had been struggling with outdated brand messaging when they first approached Pinnacle 3 years ago. I'd spent countless hours understanding their manufacturing processes, interviewing their customers and developing positioning that transformed them from a generic parts supplier into a boutique firm specializing in precision components for aerospace applications. The strategy had increased their profit margins by 40% and established them as a preferred vendor for several major aerospace companies. Yet here was Amanda praising Jessica's strategic vision while I sat silently at the end of the table, watching someone else receive credit for the kind of forward-thinking analysis that had built these very relationships. Sarah developed the foundational strategy that achieved those remarkable results for Meridian, Maria said suddenly, her voice cutting through the conversation with quiet authority. Her analysis of the aerospace market's demand for precision manufacturing was what positioned Amanda's company for that growth. The table fell silent for a moment, and I felt grateful for Maria's loyalty even as I recognized the awkwardness her comment had created. Jessica's smile remained perfectly composed, but I caught a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Of course, Jessica replied smoothly. Sarah's historical work provided an excellent foundation. My role is building on that foundation to identify next-level opportunities that might not have been apparent during the initial strategic development. Historical work, foundation, next-level opportunity. Each phrase was carefully chosen to acknowledge my contributions, while positioning them as preliminary steps toward Jessica's more sophisticated analysis. Michael cleared his throat, sensing the need to redirect the conversation. The important thing is that we're all working together to deliver exceptional results for our clients. This collaborative approach is what sets Pinnacle apart in a competitive marketplace. But as dinner progressed, the collaboration felt increasingly one-sided. Jessica dominated conversations about strategy and future planning, while I found myself relegated to discussing operational details and implementation logistics. When clients asked questions about campaign performance or market analysis, their attention naturally turned toward Jessica, who had positioned herself as the authority on strategic thinking. The final humiliation came during dessert, when Amanda Chen addressed the table with a toast. I want to thank the entire Pinnacle team for their exceptional work, but especially Jessica for the innovative thinking that's opening new possibilities for all our businesses. The raised glasses and murmured agreements felt like a funeral for my professional reputation. I sipped my wine and smiled politely while internally calculating how many of these relationships I was watching slip away from me in real time. As the evening wound down and clients began making their departures, Mark Davidson approached me near the restaurant's entrance. "Sarah, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for Davidson Tech. Your insights were instrumental in our success." "Thank you, Mark. I'm proud of what we accomplished together." He hesitated for a moment, then spoke more quiet. "I have to admit, some of Jessica's expansion ideas are intriguing, but I hope we can maintain the thoughtful approach you and I developed. Growth is exciting, but sustainable growth requires the kind of careful analysis you've always provided." His words offered a small measure of validation, but they also highlighted the precarious position I now occupied. Clients were being drawn toward Jessica's ambitious vision while still valuing my analytical approach. I was being slowly squeezed out of strategic conversations, while being expected to maintain operational excellence. "I'll always be available to provide whatever insights I can," I told Mark, though I wondered how much longer that would remain true. As Michael, Jessica, and I rode the elevator up to Pinnacle's office to retrieve our cars from the building's parking garage, the silence felt heavy with unspoken tension. Jessica checked her phone while Michael stared at the floor numbers, and I watched our reflection in the polished steel doors, 3 people occupying the same space while existing in completely different realities. Part 3, The Strategic Planning Defiance. The confrontation I'd been dreading came 2 days later during our monthly strategic planning session. Michael had scheduled the meeting for Friday afternoon, ostensibly to review upcoming campaigns and allocate resources for the fourth quarter. But as I prepared my materials that morning, I suspected the real agenda involved formalizing the power shift that had been happening gradually since Jessica's promotion. I arrived at conference room Zilker 15 minutes early, hoping to review my presentation notes in peace before the others arrived. The quarterly plans I'd developed represented months of careful analysis, client feedback sessions, and market research. Each campaign proposal included detailed budgets, timeline projections, and success metrics based on historical performance data and industry benchmarks. For Morrison Industries, I'd outlined a campaign extension that would build on our current success by expanding into trade publications and industry conferences. The approach was methodical and proven, designed to reinforce their market position while carefully managing costs. For Davidson Tech, I'd proposed a measured expansion of their current messaging into specialized cybersecurity publications, targeting the mid-market technology sector where they'd already established credibility. The strategy acknowledged Mark's concerns about overextension while identifying realistic growth opportunities. These weren't flashy proposals designed to impress executives in boardrooms. They were solid, strategic plans built on thorough understanding of each client's capabilities, market position, and long-term objectives. They represented the kind of thoughtful, sustainable approach that had built Pinnacle's reputation for delivering measurable results rather than empty promises. Jessica entered the conference room just as I finished arranging my materials, carrying a leather portfolio that seemed to contain significantly more documents than my own folder. She wore a crisp white blouse and navy skirt that projected confidence and competence, and her hair was pulled back in a style that made her look both professional and approachable. "Good afternoon, Sarah," she said with a smile that seemed genuine but somehow didn't reach her eye. "I'm looking forward to seeing what strategies you've developed for the fourth quarter." There was something in her tone that suggested she already knew her own proposals would supersede mine, that this meeting was more formality than genuine strategic discussion. I returned her smile and tried to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I think you'll find some interesting opportunities for sustainable growth," I replied, keeping my voice level and professional. Michael arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, followed by David Kim, our head of account management, and Tom Rodriguez, our creative director. Maria slipped in just as Michael was settling into his chair at the head of the table, offering me a quick smile of support before taking her seat. "Thank you all for being here," Michael began, his tone suggesting this was an important meeting that would set direction for the coming month. As we head into the fourth quarter, it's crucial that we align our strategic approach across all departments to maximize both client satisfaction and revenue growth. He gestured toward Jessica, who was reviewing notes on her tablet with the focused attention of someone preparing for a significant presentation. Jessica has been conducting comprehensive analysis of our current client portfolio and market opportunity. Her insights will help guide our resource allocation and campaign development moving forward. I felt my chest tighten as I realized that Jessica would be presenting first, positioning her recommendations as the framework within which my own proposals would be evaluated. It was a subtle but significant power play that would allow her to shape the entire discussion. Jessica, would you like to share your findings? She stood smoothly, moving to the presentation screen with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment carefully. Thank you, Mike. I've spent the past 3 weeks conducting detailed analysis of our client relationships, market positioning, and growth opportunities. Her first slide displayed a sophisticated chart showing client revenue projections under different strategic scenarios. The graphics were polished and professional, clearly the work of someone who understood how to present complex information in compelling visual formats. My analysis reveals that Pinnacle is currently operating below our potential in several key areas, she began, her voice clear and authoritative. While our existing strategies have provided steady growth, they've also limited our ability to capture emerging market opportunities. Existing strategies, limited ability. I recognized the careful language of someone building a case for significant changes while avoiding direct criticism of current approaches. For example, Morrison Industries represents an excellent case study in both our successes and our unrealized potential. Jessica clicked to a new slide, showing Morrison's current market share alongside projections for expanded market penetration. Sarah's campaign achieved impressive results within the target demographic we initially identified. However, my research indicates that Morrison's brand positioning could appeal to significantly broader audiences, particularly younger consumers who are increasingly making B2B purchasing decisions. I felt heat rise in my neck as Jessica continued her presentation. The target demographic we initially identified had been based on extensive market research and direct feedback from Morrison's existing customer. We hadn't randomly selected middle-aged professionals as our focus. We'd identified them as the decision-makers who actually purchased Morrison's services and valued their quality-focused approach. By repositioning Morrison's messaging to emphasize innovation and cutting-edge technology rather than reliability and established expertise, we could capture market share in the emerging tech startup sector while maintaining our current client base. David Kim leaned forward with interest. What kind of timeline are you projecting for this repositioning? I recommend a 6-month campaign launch beginning in January, with budget allocation that reflects the expanded scope and higher growth potential. Jessica replied, clicking to a slide that showed significantly increased spending projection. The initial investment would be substantial, but my analysis projects ROI improvement of 40 to 60% within the first year of implementation. I stared at the numbers on the screen, recognizing immediately that Jessica's projections were based on optimistic assumptions about market response and conversion rate. The startup sector she wanted to target was notoriously price-sensitive and brand-fickle, characteristics that directly contradicted Morrison's business model as a premium service provider. Jessica? I said, raising my hand slightly to request speaking time, I'm concerned about the fundamental assumptions underlying this strategy. Morrison's competitive advantage lies in their ability to provide personalized service and established expertise. Repositioning them as an innovation-focused startup solution could undermine the brand equity we've built over the past 2 years. Jessica turned toward me with an expression of polite interest that somehow managed to convey patience with outdated thinking. Sarah, I understand your attachment to the current approach, and I want to acknowledge the solid foundation it's provided. However, market conditions evolve rapidly, and strategies that worked 2 years ago may not capture tomorrow's opportunities. Attachment to the current approach, solid foundation. Tomorrow's opportunities. Each phrase was designed to position my strategic thinking as nostalgic rather than analytical, conservative rather than carefully considered. The startup market you're targeting has an average client retention rate of 18 months, I continued, determined to present the data that Jessica's presentation had glossed over. Morrison's current clients have an average relationship duration of 4 years, with several contracts extending beyond 7 years. Trading long-term partnerships for short-term growth could destabilize their entire business model. Michael shifted in his chair, and I could see his impatience with what he clearly viewed as resistance to innovative thinking. Sarah, those are valid concerns, but we also need to consider Morrison's growth potential. If they remain confined to their current market segment, they'll eventually hit a ceiling that limits both their success and our revenue from the account. With respect, Michael, Morrison's revenue has grown by 200% over the past 18 months while maintaining profit margins that most of their competitors can't match. That's not a ceiling, that's sustainable growth built on genuine market advantage. Jessica clicked to her next slide, which showed a comparison of Morrison's current performance against projected results from her proposed strategy. Sarah raises important points about risk management, but my analysis suggests that the potential rewards significantly outweigh the risk. The startup sector represents a market opportunity worth approximately $50 million regionally, with Morrison's expertise positioning them to capture meaningful market share if they move quickly. Waiting for more market research or gradual implementation could mean missing the opportunity entirely. Tom Rodriguez, our creative director, spoke up for the first time. Jessica, the creative requirements for targeting startups versus established businesses are fundamentally different. The messaging, visual approach, and media strategy would essentially require developing an entirely new brand identity. Exactly, Jessica replied with enthusiasm. That's what makes this opportunity so exciting. We're not just tweaking an existing campaign, we're creating a comprehensive brand evolution that positions Morrison for the next phase of their growth. Brand evolution. I recognized the language of someone who understood how to make radical changes sound like natural progression. But evolution implied gradual adaptation based on environmental pressures, not the sudden strategic pivot Jessica was proposing. What about Davidson Tech? I asked, determined to understand the full scope of the changes she was recommending. Are you proposing similar repositioning for all our clients? Jessica's smile brightened as she clicked to a new section of her presentation. Davidson represents an even more exciting opportunity for strategic expansion. Their success in mid-market cybersecurity has created the perfect foundation for entering the healthcare and financial services sector. I felt my stomach drop as I realized Jessica was proceeding with exactly the expansion strategy Mark Davidson had expressed concerns about during our dinner at Romano. Despite his clear preference for the cautious, sustainable approach we developed together, she was recommending the aggressive growth plan he'd specifically wanted to avoid. Mark and I discussed those markets extensively during our strategic planning sessions, I said, my voice carrying more tension than I intended. He has significant concerns about the regulatory complexity and resource requirements in both healthcare and financial services. Those concerns reflect the market conditions that existed when you conducted your original analysis, Jessica replied smoothly. Recent regulatory changes and technological developments have created new opportunities for firms like Davidson to enter these markets with lower barriers to entry and higher profit potential. Recent regulatory change. I had no idea what specific changes she was referencing, and I suspected she was making vague claims about market evolution to support predetermined conclusions. Can you specify which regulatory changes you're referencing? I asked directly. Jessica paused for a fraction of a second, a hesitation so brief that anyone not paying careful attention might have missed it. The healthcare sector has seen significant streamlining of cybersecurity compliance requirements under the updated HIPAA guidelines, while financial services regulations have become more standardized across state jurisdictions. Her answer sounded authoritative and detailed, but something about the phrasing felt generic, like talking points rather than specific knowledge. I made a mental note to research the regulatory changes she'd mentioned to verify whether they actually supported her strategic recommendations. Michael, however, seemed impressed by her presentation. These expansion opportunities could significantly increase revenue from both accounts, while positioning us as a strategic partner rather than just a service provider. Strategic partner. Again, the exact language I'd used to define our approach to client relationships, now being presented as Jessica's innovative thinking. I'd like to see Sarah's proposals before we make any decisions about resource allocation, Maria said suddenly, her voice cutting through the momentum Jessica had been building. We should evaluate all strategic options before committing to such significant changes in direction. I felt grateful for Maria's intervention, though I recognized that my presentation would now be viewed as a response to Jessica's proposals rather than an independent strategic analysis. Of course, Michael agreed, though his tone suggested he viewed this as a formality rather than genuine consideration of alternative approaches. Sarah, let's see what you've developed. I stood and moved to the presentation screen, acutely aware that I was following a polished, comprehensive analysis with materials that would inevitably seem conservative by comparison. My slides were clean and professional, but they lacked the visual sophistication of Jessica's charts and graphs. My recommendations focus on building on our current successes while identifying sustainable growth opportunities that align with each client's core competencies and market position. I began, clicking to my first slide showing Morrison's performance metrics over the past 18 months. For Morrison Industries, I propose extending our current campaign into trade publications and industry conferences, targeting the specific market segments where we've already achieved proven success. I outlined the strategy I'd developed, emphasizing the careful research and client feedback that had informed each recommendation. The approach was methodical and data-driven, built on thorough understanding of Morrison's actual customers rather than theoretical analysis of potential markets. This strategy projects revenue growth of 20 to 30% over the next 12 months, with high confidence levels based on historical performance and market testing we've already conducted. 20 to 30%, Michael repeated, and I could hear the implicit comparison to Jessica's 40 to 60% projections. That seems relatively modest given Morrison's current momentum. It's conservative because it's achievable, I replied. These projections are based on actual market research and client feedback rather than theoretical modeling. Morrison's customers value reliability and proven expertise, characteristics that require careful messaging and gradual market expansion. I continued with my Davidson Tech recommendations, emphasizing the sustainable growth strategy Mark and I had developed through extensive discussions about his company's capabilities and market positioning. Davidson's strength lies in providing personalized cybersecurity solutions for mid-market technology companies. This proposal identifies opportunities to expand within that market segment through targeted outreach and strategic partnerships, rather than entering unfamiliar sectors with different regulatory requirements and customer expectations. David Kim asked several detailed questions about implementation timelines and budget allocation, and I could provide specific answers based on the thorough planning I'd conducted. But I could sense that the room's energy had shifted during my presentation. My methodical approach felt cautious and uninspiring compared to Jessica's vision of dramatic growth and market expansion. When I finished, Michael thanked me for the thorough analysis, but his tone suggested polite acknowledgement rather than genuine enthusiasm. Both presentations offer valuable insights, he said diplomatically. We'll need to carefully evaluate the risk-reward balance for each approach. But as the meeting concluded and we began gathering our materials, I could tell that the decision had already been made. Jessica's bold vision of transformation and growth had captured Michael's imagination in ways that my careful, sustainable strategies could not match. Sarah, Michael said as the others filed out of the conference room, I'd like to speak with you privately for a few minutes. I remained seated as Jessica, Maria, David, and Tom left the room, their conversations trailing off as they headed back toward their desks. The silence that settled over the conference room felt heavy with unspoken tensions and impending change. Michael closed the door and returned to his seat across from me, his expression serious but not unkind. Sarah, I want you to know that I appreciate the hard work you've put into developing these strategic recommendations. The careful phrasing of his opening suggested that appreciation would be followed by disappointment, that my hard work was about to be set aside in favor of Jessica's more ambitious proposal. However, he continued, confirming my expectations, I think we need to consider whether our current strategic approach is limiting Pinnacle's growth potential. Current strategic approach. My strategic approach, the methodology that had built most of our successful client relationships and established our reputation for delivering measurable results. Michael, the strategies I've developed are based on extensive client research and proven market analysis. They're designed to build long-term partnerships, rather than chase short-term growth that might not be sustainable. He nodded thoughtfully, but I could see that my arguments weren't changing his perspective. That's exactly what concerns me, Sarah. In a rapidly evolving marketplace, long-term thinking can become a limitation if it prevents us from capitalizing on immediate opportunity. What Jessica has shown us today represents the kind of forward-thinking analysis that could position Pinnacle as an industry leader, rather than just another competent marketing agency. Industry leader. Another phrase that implied my approach was somehow keeping us from achieving our full potential, that my careful strategies were holding back the company's ambition. I believe sustainable growth builds stronger foundations than rapid expansion, I said, my voice remaining calm despite the frustration building in my chest. The clients we've retained for years generate more revenue and provide more stable relationships than constantly acquiring and losing new accounts. Of course, Michael agreed, but we also need to consider whether those stable relationships are reaching their maximum potential. Jessica's analysis suggests that several of our clients could achieve significantly greater success with more aggressive strategic approaches. More aggressive strategic approaches. I realized that this conversation wasn't really about marketing strategies or client relations. It was about a fundamental shift in how Michael viewed Pinnacle's mission and my role in achieving it. Are you asking me to implement Jessica's recommendations instead of my own? I asked directly. Michael paused, clearly weighing his words carefully. I'm asking you to collaborate with Jessica on developing hybrid approaches that incorporate both your analytical rigor and her innovative thinking. Collaborate with Jessica, hybrid approaches. The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the reality that my strategic authority was being subordinated to Jessica's vision for the company's future. What does that collaboration look like practically? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Jessica will take the lead on strategic development for major accounts, while you focus on implementation and operational excellence. Your attention to detail and client relationship skills are invaluable for ensuring that ambitious strategies are executed effectively. Implementation and operational excellence. I was being repositioned from strategic leader to tactical executor, from the architect of campaigns to the manager who ensured that someone else's vision was properly implemented. The demotion was being presented as recognition of my strengths, but the underlying message was clear. My role in shaping Pinnacle's strategic direction was ending. I see, I said quietly, not trusting myself to say more without revealing the depth of my disappointment and anger. Michael seemed to interpret my calm response as acceptance of the new arrangement. Sarah, this isn't about diminishing your contributions to Pinnacle's success. It's about positioning everyone for their highest and best use as we continue growing. Highest and best use. The phrase suggested that my strategic thinking was somehow a less valuable application of my skills than project management and client maintenance. I understand, I replied, though understanding and accepting were entirely different things. As I gathered my presentation materials and headed back toward my desk, I realized that my defiance during the strategic planning session had accomplished nothing except clarifying my diminished status within the company I'd helped build. The careful strategies I'd developed, the client relationships I'd nurtured, the analytical frameworks that had guided Pinnacle's success, all of it was being set aside in favor of Jessica's bold vision for transformation and growth. But as I sat at my desk staring at the Morrison Industries case study that had won us a regional marketing award, I felt something shift inside me. The anger and disappointment were still there, but they were being joined by something else. A growing determination to prove that sustainable strategies and careful analysis could achieve results that ambitious projections and theoretical modeling could never match. I wasn't ready to accept my demotion to tactical executor. Not yet. Part 4. The Sabotage and Violence. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, and it started with an email that shouldn't have existed. I was reviewing quarterly performance reports on a quiet Tuesday morning when a message appeared in my inbox from Mark Davidson with the subject line "Concerns about new strategic direction." Sarah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly, but I wanted to discuss some concerns that have emerged since our conversation about expansion into healthcare cybersecurity. Jessica scheduled a follow-up meeting yesterday to present detailed implementation plans, but several aspects of her proposal don't align with our earlier discussions about sustainable growth and market focus. I'm particularly worried about the timeline she's suggesting for market entry and the resource commitments required for regulatory compliance. When you and I originally discussed these sectors, we agreed that the preparation period alone could take 12 to 18 months. Jessica is suggesting we can be market ready within 6 months, which seems unrealistic given our current staffing and expertise levels. Could we schedule some time to discuss this privately? I value your analytical approach and would appreciate your perspective on whether these concerns are justified or if I'm being overly cautious. I read the email twice, feeling a mixture of vindication and alarm. Mark's concerns validated my earlier reservations about Jessica's aggressive expansion strategy, but his request for a private consultation also highlighted the awkward position I now occupied. Officially, Jessica was leading strategic development for all major accounts. Responding to Mark's request could be viewed as undermining her authority or operating outside my designated role, but Mark was asking for exactly the kind of analytical perspective that had built our successful partnership over the past 2 years. His concerns were legitimate, based on realistic assessment of Davidson Tech's capabilities, rather than optimistic projections about market opportunity. As someone who understood both his company's strengths and the cybersecurity industry's regulatory complexities, I had valuable insights that could help him make informed decisions about his firm's future. I composed a careful response, agreeing to meet with Mark while copying Jessica on the email to maintain transparency about our communication. My message emphasized that I was responding to specific analytical questions, rather than attempting to influence strategic decisions outside my current responsibility. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at Davidson Tech's offices, a modest but well-equipped space in Austin's tech corridor. I'd visited several times during our initial strategic development work, and I appreciated the company's focus on functionality over flashy aesthetic. The environment reflected Mark's engineering background and his preference for substance over style. I arrived 15 minutes early and spent a few minutes reviewing my notes about Davidson's market position, competitive advantages, and resource limitations. These weren't theoretical considerations, they were practical realities I'd learned through extensive conversations with Mark's team about their capabilities and growth objectives. Mark greeted me warmly and led me to a small conference room where he'd spread out documents related to Jessica's expansion proposal. The materials were professionally prepared, with detailed timelines, budget projections, and market analysis that looked impressive at first glance. "Sarah, thank you for making time for this," he began, his tone reflecting genuine appreciation mixed with underlying concern. "I want to start by saying that I have enormous respect for Jessica's expertise and enthusiasm. Her research into market opportunities is comprehensive, and her projections for revenue growth are certainly appealing." He paused, gesturing toward the documents on the table. "But as I've reviewed her implementation timeline and resource requirements, I've become increasingly worried that we might be setting Davidson up for failure by moving too aggressively into unfamiliar markets." I examined the materials he'd shown me, immediately recognizing several areas where Jessica's recommendations diverged from the careful, sustainable approach Mark and I had developed together. Her timeline for healthcare market entry assumed that regulatory compliance could be achieved in 4 months, while my research had indicated that most firms required 8 to 12 months to develop adequate HIPAA compliance framework. "Mark, your concerns are absolutely justified," I said, pointing to specific sections of Jessica's proposal. "Healthcare cybersecurity requires specialized expertise that takes time to develop. Rushing into this market without proper preparation could expose Davidson to significant liability risk." His expression showed relief that his instincts were being validated by someone with relevant analytical experience. "That's exactly what worried me." Jessica's presentation made it sound like regulatory compliance was mostly a matter of paperwork and documentation, but my preliminary research suggests the requirements are much more complex. We spent the next hour reviewing Jessica's proposal in detail, identifying specific areas where her recommendations needed modification or additional analysis. My concerns weren't about the fundamental concept of market expansion, they were about the practical realities of implementing such changes within Davidson's current capabilities and timeline constraints. "What would you recommend as an alternative approach?" Mark asked as our discussion wound down. I think Jessica's long-term vision has merit, but the implementation timeline needs to reflect realistic preparation requirements, I replied carefully. Healthcare cybersecurity represents a genuine opportunity for Davidson, but entering that market successfully requires 18 to 24 months of careful preparation, rather than the 6-month timeline she's proposing. Mark nodded thoughtfully. That aligns much better with my understanding of the regulatory environment and our current staffing capabilities. As I gathered my materials and prepared to leave, Mark made a request that I should have anticipated but somehow hadn't fully considered. Sarah, would you be willing to prepare a modified implementation plan that incorporates Jessica's market analysis with more realistic timelines and resource requirements? The request put me in an impossible position. Developing an alternative strategic plan would clearly exceed my current role responsibilities and could be viewed as directly challenging Jessica's authority. But Mark was asking for exactly the kind of analytical work that had built our successful partnership, and his concerns were legitimate enough to warrant serious consideration. Mark, I appreciate your confidence in my analytical capabilities, but Jessica is leading strategic development for Davidson's account. Any modifications to her strategic recommendations should probably go through official channels. Mark's face showed disappointment, but he nodded with understanding. Of course, you're absolutely right about proper protocols. I'll schedule a meeting with Jessica to discuss these timeline concerns directly. I left Davidson Tech feeling conflicted about the conversation. I'd provided valuable analytical perspective that addressed legitimate client concerns, but I'd also potentially undermined Jessica's strategic authority by validating criticisms of her proposal. The situation highlighted the impossible position I now occupied, possessing expertise that clients valued while being officially excluded from strategic decision-making process. The consequences of that meeting became apparent 2 days later when Jessica requested a private conversation in conference room Barton Springs. Her expression was professionally composed, but I detected an underlying tension that suggested this wouldn't be a routine discussion about project coordination. Sarah, I wanted to follow up on your meeting with Mark Davidson earlier this week, she began, her tone carefully neutral. He mentioned that you had some concerns about the implementation timeline for healthcare market expansion. So Mark had discussed our conversation with Jessica, which was appropriate given her role as. I'd expected this follow-up, though I hoped it would focus on substantive strategic questions rather than territorial concerns about client communication. Mark asked for my perspective on regulatory compliance requirements. I replied even. I shared some analytical insights based on research I'd conducted during our original strategic planning process. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate your willingness to provide historical context. However, I'm concerned that conflicting strategic recommendations might confuse our clients and undermine confidence in our unified approach. Conflicting strategic recommendations, historical context. The language suggested that my input was being characterized as outdated information that contradicted current strategic thinking rather than legitimate analytical concerns about implementation feasibility. I didn't provide alternative strategic recommendations. I clarified. I answered specific questions about regulatory timeline requirements based on industry research. Of course, Jessica agreed, though her tone suggested she viewed this as a distinction without meaningful difference. Moving forward, I think it would be helpful if client questions about strategic implementation were directed through my office to ensure consistent messaging. Consistent message. The phrase implied that my direct communication with clients was somehow creating confusion or mixed signals rather than providing valuable analytical perspective. Jessica, these clients have worked with me for years. They often have specific questions about implementation details or market analysis that don't require strategic oversight. Her smile remained professional, but I caught a flash of something harder in her eye. I understand the historical relationship, Sarah, but our new structure requires clear delineation of responsibilities. Strategic communication should flow through the CCO office to maintain unified client messaging. Strategic communication. She was expanding the definition of her role to include any client conversation that touched on campaign development or market analysis, effectively cutting off my direct access to the relationships I'd built over years of collaborative work. What about operational questions or project management issues? I asked, recognizing that she was systematically limiting my client interaction to purely administrative functions. Those can certainly continue through your current channels, she replied graciously. I'm simply ensuring that strategic discussions maintain consistency with our overall account management approach. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, but the essential point had been established. My client relationships were being redefined to exclude strategic input while maintaining administrative responsibility. I was being repositioned as a project coordinator rather than a strategic consultant, managing implementation of plans I had no role in developing. But the real escalation came the following Monday, when I discovered that Jessica had scheduled a strategy session with Morrison Industries without informing me. I learned about the meeting when Morrison's marketing director, Jennifer Walsh, called my direct line to ask about preparation material. "Hi Sarah, I wanted to confirm that you'd be joining us for Thursday's strategy review," Jennifer said, her tone suggesting she expected my participation. Jessica mentioned some exciting new directions for the campaign, but I wanted to make sure we'd have your analytical perspective as well. Strategy review. I quickly checked my calendar and found no meetings scheduled with Morrison for Thursday. Either I hadn't been invited to a strategic discussion about a client I'd managed for 2 years, or there had been some scheduling oversight that needed immediate clarification. "Jennifer, I don't show that meeting on my calendar. Let me check with Jessica about the scheduling details." "Oh," Jennifer replied, her voice showing surprise and slight concern. "I assumed you'd be involved since you developed our original strategy. Should I be worried about continuity if you're not participating in strategic reviews?" Her question highlighted exactly the problem with Jessica's approach to account management. Morrison's success had been built on collaborative strategic development that incorporated client feedback, market analysis, and campaign performance data. Excluding me from strategic discussions meant losing institutional knowledge about what had worked, why it had worked, and how to build on that success. "Let me clarify the situation and get back to you," I told Jennifer, though I was beginning to understand that the exclusion was intentional rather than accidental. I walked directly to Jessica's desk, finding her reviewing presentation materials that appeared to be related to Morrison's account. She looked up with a smile that seemed genuine until I explained the reason for my visit. "Jessica, I just spoke with Jennifer Walsh about Thursday's strategy session. I wasn't aware that Morrison had requested a strategic review." Her expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been annoyance at being questioned about her scheduling decisions. "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of strategic communication that should flow through the CCO office. Morrison's leadership requested a comprehensive review of campaign performance and future opportunities. Morrison's leadership requested this meeting." Jennifer seemed surprised that I wasn't included, which suggests the request might have originated internally. Jessica's smile became more fixed, and I could see that my questioning was irritating her more than she wanted to reveal. "Client relationships require proactive management. Sarah, sometimes we need to anticipate strategic needs rather than waiting for explicit requests." Proactive management, anticipating strategic needs. The language suggested that my approach to client relationships was somehow reactive rather than strategic, that I'd been failing to identify opportunities that required Jessica's more sophisticated attention. "Jessica, Morrison's campaign is performing 30% above projections. Jennifer has expressed satisfaction with our current approach on multiple occasions. What strategic needs are we anticipating that haven't been addressed through our regular review process?" Her pause before responding suggested she was carefully considering how much to reveal about her actual motivations for the meeting. "Sarah, successful account management requires looking beyond current performance to identify next-level opportunity. Morrison represents significant potential for campaign expansion and budget growth that we haven't fully explored." Campaign expansion and budget growth. I recognize the language of someone focused on revenue generation rather than client success, someone who viewed existing relationships as platforms for upselling rather than partnerships built on trust and measurable results. Morrison specifically chose Pinnacle because we demonstrated understanding of their actual market position rather than trying to oversell them on unnecessary services. I replied. Their trust in our analytical approach is what's driven their campaign success and budget increases over the past 2 years. Jessica's professional composure slipped slightly, revealing impatience with what she clearly viewed as outdated thinking about client relationship management. Sarah, that conservative approach may have worked historically, but it's limiting Morrison's growth potential and our revenue opportunities. Thursday's meeting will explore more ambitious strategies that could benefit both parties. Conservative approach, limiting growth potential, historical success. Each phrase was designed to characterize my client management philosophy as outdated thinking that prevented both Morrison and Pinnacle from achieving their full potential. I'd like to attend Thursday's meeting, I said direct. Morrison values continuity in strategic discussions, and my analytical perspective could contribute to more informed decision-making about campaign modifications. Jessica's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Sarah, I think it would be confusing for Morrison to receive strategic input from multiple sources. Clean communication requires clear authority, and my role as CCO makes me the appropriate strategic contact for all major accounts. Clean communication, clear authority. She was establishing territorial boundaries that excluded me from strategic discussions, while positioning my involvement as somehow problematic rather than valuable. Jessica, Morrison has worked with me for 2 years. They specifically value my analytical approach and detailed understanding of their market position. Excluding me from strategic discussions could damage the trust we've built. I appreciate your concern for client relationships, she replied, her tone suggesting patience with unreasonable demands, but I'm confident that Morrison will appreciate our more unified strategic approach. The conversation was clearly over, and I understood that attending Thursday's meeting wasn't negotiable. Jessica had positioned herself as the sole strategic authority for Morrison's account, and my participation would be viewed as challenging her leadership rather than contributing valuable perspective. But as I walked back to my desk, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my approach to these territorial battles. Instead of feeling frustrated or defeated by Jessica's maneuvering, I felt a growing sense of clarity about the situation I was facing and the choices I needed to make. That evening, I stayed late at the office to review Morrison's complete file, including all strategic documents, performance reports, and client communication records I'd developed over 2 years of collaborative work. If Jessica was determined to exclude me from Thursday's strategy session, I wanted to understand exactly what she'd be working with and what institutional knowledge would be lost in the transition. Morrison Industries had approached Pinnacle in a state of strategic confusion. Their previous marketing agency had developed campaigns that looked impressive but failed to generate meaningful customer engagement or sales growth. They'd spent significant money on flashy creative work that didn't connect with their actual audience or communicate their genuine competitive advantages. My initial analysis had revealed that Morrison's marketing problem wasn't creative execution, it was strategic position. They were trying to compete on innovation and cutting-edge technology in a market where customers valued reliability and proven performance. Their actual competitive advantage lay in their ability to provide consistent, high-quality manufacturing services with exceptional customer support. The strategic shift I'd recommended seemed simple in retrospect, but it had required extensive market research and customer analysis to identify. Instead of positioning Morrison as the most innovative manufacturer, we'd positioned them as the most reliable partner for companies that couldn't afford production delays or quality and consistency. The campaign's success had exceeded every projection because it aligned Morrison's messaging with their actual strengths and their customers' real priority. Client retention had improved dramatically, referral rates had doubled, and Morrison had been able to increase their prices while maintaining strong demand for their services. This wasn't theoretical marketing success. It was measurable business transformation, based on thorough understanding of market dynamics and customer psychology. The strategy had worked because it was built on genuine insights, rather than ambitious assumptions about what might work. As I reviewed the documentation of Morrison's strategic development, I realized that Jessica's approach represented a fundamental misunderstanding of what had driven the campaign's success. Her focus on expansion and budget growth missed the essential point: that Morrison's customers valued consistency and reliability over innovation and transformation. Thursday's strategy session would likely present Morrison with exciting opportunities for market expansion and brand evolution. The same kind of ambitious growth strategies Jessica had proposed for Davidson Tech. But those strategies would conflict with the careful positioning that had built Morrison's current success and could potentially damage the client relationships that had driven their revenue growth. I printed copies of Morrison's original strategic analysis, performance reports, and client feedback summaries, creating a comprehensive record of the analytical work that had established their current market position. If Jessica's new strategy proved unsuccessful, this documentation would provide a roadmap for returning to the approaches that had generated measurable results. But as I organized these materials in my desk drawer, I realized I was preparing for failure rather than working toward success. I was creating contingency plans for strategic disasters, rather than participating in strategic development that could benefit both Morrison and Pinnacle. The recognition hit me with unexpected force. I was no longer functioning as a strategic partner in the company I'd helped build. I'd become a passive observer, documenting successful approaches, while watching them be replaced by untested theories about market opportunities and growth potential. Michael found me at my desk at nearly 9 o'clock that evening, reviewing client files under the harsh fluorescent lights that made the empty office feel particularly stark and institutional. "Sarah, you're here late," he observed, his tone suggesting surprise rather than appreciation for my dedication. "Everything okay?" I looked up at my husband, this man I'd partnered with to build Pinnacle from a struggling startup into a respected marketing agency. His question carried undertones of concern but also impatience with whatever issues were keeping me at the office after normal business hours. "I'm reviewing Morrison's strategic development history," I replied simply. "Jessica has a strategy session with them tomorrow, and I wanted to make sure she has access to all the analytical work that established their current campaign approach." Michael's expression shifted to something between irritation and disappointment. "Sarah, Jessica is perfectly capable of managing Morrison's account without extensive background briefings. You don't need to micromanage every strategic transition." The phrase suggested that my concern for analytical continuity was somehow problematic rather than valuable, that ensuring Jessica had complete information was interference rather than professional collaboration. "Michael, Morrison's success is based on very specific strategic insights about their market position and customer priorities. If those insights are lost during the transition, we could undermine 2 years of carefully built client trust." He moved closer to my desk, his posture showing the kind of frustrated patience that suggested he'd had this conversation before and found it tiresome. "Sarah, you're acting like Jessica doesn't understand strategic analysis or client relationship management. She's a highly qualified professional who brings fresh perspective to our account management approach." Fresh perspective. I was beginning to hate that phrase, and everything it implied about the value of experience, institutional knowledge, and proven analytical approach. "I'm not questioning Jessica's qualifications," I said, though my tone probably suggested otherwise. "I'm concerned about maintaining continuity with strategies that have generated measurable success." Michael sat down in the chair across from my desk, his expression growing more serious. "Sarah, I think we need to talk honestly about what's been happening over the past few weeks." His tone suggested that this conversation would address broader issues than Morrison's account management or Thursday's strategy session. I saved the document I'd been reviewing and turned to face him directly, sensing that we were approaching a confrontation that had been building for weeks. "I've been receiving feedback from several clients and team members about tensions related to account management transitions," he continued. "Some people are concerned that resistance to our new structure is creating confusion and undermining team cohesion." Resistance to our new structure, undermining team cohesion. The language suggested that my efforts to maintain strategic continuity were being characterized as disruptive behavior, rather than legitimate professional concerns. "What specific feedback are you referring to?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Jessica mentioned that you've been questioning her strategic recommendations with clients, suggesting alternative approaches that contradict her analysis. Mark Davidson called to express concern about receiving conflicting, strategic advice from different team members, questioning strategic recommendations, conflicting, strategic advice. My analytical input was being reframed as undermining Jessica's authority, rather than providing valuable perspective based on extensive client knowledge. Mark asked specific questions about regulatory compliance timelines. I provided factual information based on industry research, not alternative strategic recommendations. His expression showed the kind of impatience that suggested he viewed this as semantic arguing, rather than meaningful distinction. Sarah, the specific details matter less than the overall pattern. Our clients need to receive unified strategic guidance, and that requires everyone operating within their designated roles. Operating within designated roles. I realized that this conversation was about establishing clear boundaries for my involvement in strategic discussions, ensuring that I understood the limitations of my repositioned authority within Pinnacle's new structure. What exactly are my designated role responsibilities? I asked directly. Michael paused, clearly weighing how explicitly to define the constraints he was imposing. Your expertise in campaign implementation and client communication is invaluable. Moving forward, I'd like you to focus on those areas while allowing Jessica to handle strategic development and account management for major clients. Campaign implementation and client communication, strategic development and account management. He was formalizing the division of responsibilities that had been emerging gradually, ensuring that I understood my exclusion from strategic decision-making was permanent rather than temporary. Michael, strategic development and implementation are interconnected processes. Effective campaigns require coordination between strategic thinking and operational execution. Of course, he agreed, and that coordination will happen through regular communication between you and Jessica. She'll handle strategic planning, and you'll ensure excellent execution of those plans. Regular communication between you and Jessica. I would be receiving strategic directions rather than participating in strategic development, implementing someone else's vision, rather than contributing to its creation. What about clients who specifically request my strategic input? I asked, thinking of Morrison's satisfaction with our collaborative approach and Davidson's appreciation for my analytical perspective. Those requests should be directed through Jessica's office to ensure consistency with overall account strategy. I'm sure clients will appreciate our more unified approach once they understand the benefits of clearer communication channels. Directed through Jessica's office, unified approach, clearer communication channel. Each phrase reinforced the message that my direct client relationships were ending, that future interactions would be mediated through Jessica's oversight and approval. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the essential points had been established. My role at Pinnacle was being fundamentally redefined to exclude strategic authority, while maintaining operational responsibilities. I would implement Jessica's strategic vision rather than developing my own analytical approaches to client challenge. As Michael gathered his materials and prepared to leave, he made one final comment that crystallized the full scope of what was happening. Sarah, I know these transitions can be challenging, but I'm confident that this new structure will allow everyone to operate at their highest potential while delivering better results for our clients. Highest potential, better results. The same language he'd used during our earlier conversation about strategic planning, suggesting that my previous role had somehow limited both my effectiveness and Pinnacle's success. After Michael left, I remained at my desk in the empty office, staring at Morrison's strategic analysis documents and thinking about the implications of everything that had just been said. I was being systematically excluded from the work that had defined my professional identity for 15 years, relegated to administrative functions while someone else claimed credit for the analytical insights that had built our client relationship. But as I sat there in the harsh fluorescent lighting, something shifted in my perspective. The anger and frustration I'd been carrying for weeks began transforming into something clearer and more purposeful. I was finally understanding the full scope of what was happening, and with that understanding came the recognition that I had choices to make about how to respond. Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that usually energized me for important business meetings. But as I watched Jessica prepare materials for her strategy session with Morrison, I felt detached from the excitement that had once accompanied major client presentations. I was observing rather than participating, watching someone else prepare to reshape relationships I'd spent years building. Jennifer Walsh called my direct line just before the meeting began, her voice showing concern about the strategic transition she'd learned about from Jessica's preparation material. "Sarah, I wanted to check with you about some of the new directions Jessica's proposing," Jennifer said, her tone suggesting she valued my perspective on Morrison's strategic development. "Some of her recommendations seem quite different from the approach that's been working so well for us." I felt a familiar tension between providing valuable analytical input and respecting the boundaries Michael had established for my client communication. Jennifer was asking exactly the kind of strategic question that I was now supposed to direct through Jessica's office. Jessica is leading strategic development for Morrison's account now. She'll be able to address all your questions during today's session." "Of course," Jennifer replied, though her voice showed disappointment. I was just hoping to understand how her new recommendations connect to the positioning strategy we developed together. The consistency has been so important to our campaign's success. Her comment highlighted exactly what would be lost in the strategic transition: the institutional knowledge about why specific approaches had worked and how to build on that success, rather than replacing it with untested alternatives. "I'm sure Jessica will be able to explain how her recommendations build on our previous work," I said, though I suspected the opposite might be true. After the call ended, I realized that Jennifer's concerns validated my own worries about strategic continuity. Morrison's marketing director understood that their campaign's success was based on specific analytical insights about market positioning and customer priorities. She was worried about losing that foundation in pursuit of new strategic direction. But I was no longer positioned to address those concerns or ensure that valuable institutional knowledge was preserved during the transition. I could only hope that Jessica's approach would prove successful enough to justify the risks inherent in abandoning proven strategy. The strategy session lasted 3 hours, and I could observe its progress through the glass walls of conference room Zilker. Jessica presented with confidence and enthusiasm, using charts and projections that looked impressive from a distance. Jennifer and her team asked questions and took notes, though their body language suggested engagement mixed with uncertainty. When the meeting concluded, I watched Morrison's team gather their materials with expressions that seemed thoughtful rather than excited. They were processing information rather than celebrating new opportunities, which suggested that Jessica's recommendations had raised questions rather than generating immediate enthusiasm. Jennifer stopped by my desk on her way out, her expression showing the kind of diplomatic concern that client service professionals recognize immediately. "Sarah, thank you for all your work on Morrison's strategic development over the past 2 years," she said, her tone carrying genuine appreciation mixed with regret. "I hope we'll still have opportunities to benefit from your analytical perspective." Her comment felt like a goodbye rather than a transition, an acknowledgement that our collaborative strategic relationship was ending rather than evolving. The sadness in her voice suggested she understood the significance of what was being lost in Pinnacle's new account management structure. "Jennifer, Morrison's success has been a true partnership. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together." After she left, I realized that I'd just experienced the end of one of my most satisfying professional relationships. Morrison's campaign success had represented everything I valued about strategic marketing: careful analysis leading to insights that generated measurable business results. Working with Jennifer had been intellectually stimulating and professionally rewarding in ways that administrative project management could never match. But that relationship was over now, replaced by Jessica's vision of expanded market opportunities and aggressive growth strategy. Whether her approach would prove successful remained to be seen, but my role in Morrison's strategic development had clearly ended. Maria approached my desk as I was processing the implications of Jennifer's visit, her expression showing the kind of concerned friendship that had sustained me through numerous professional challenges over the years. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" she asked quietly, glancing around to ensure we wouldn't be overheard. "I know today's been difficult." Her question opened emotional floodgates I'd been carefully controlling for weeks. The frustration, disappointment, and growing sense of professional isolation suddenly felt overwhelming in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. "Maria, I think I'm losing everything I've worked to build here," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "My client relationships, my strategic authority, my professional identity. It's all being reassigned to someone who's been here for 6 months." She nodded with understanding, her eyes showing the anger I was struggling to contain. "Sarah, what's happening to you isn't about competence or performance. It's about politics and favoritism, and it's completely unfair." Politics and favoritism. The words named what I'd been reluctant to acknowledge, that my diminishing role at Pinnacle wasn't based on professional evaluation but on personal dynamics I couldn't control or influence. "I keep thinking, there must be something I could do differently," I continued. "Some way to prove that my analytical approach adds value, that experienced strategic thinking matters more than flashy presentations about theoretical opportunities." Maria's expression grew more serious. "Sarah, you've already proven your value dozens of times over. Morrison's success, Davidson's growth, the industry awards, the client retention rates, your track record speaks for itself. Then why am I being pushed aside?" She paused, clearly weighing whether to voice what we both suspected but hadn't explicitly discussed. "Because Michael is making decisions based on criteria that have nothing to do with professional competence or strategic effectiveness." Criteria that have nothing to do with professional competence. The implication hung in the air between us, naming the reality that personal dynamics were driving business decisions in ways that undermined both fairness and effectiveness. That evening, I drove home through Austin's familiar neighborhoods, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The house in Cedar Park that had represented success and stability now felt like a monument to assumptions that no longer apply. Everything I'd believed about my marriage, my career, and my value as a strategic professional was being systematically dismantled. Michael was already home when I arrived, standing in the kitchen with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the animated tone he used for important business conversations. I could hear Jessica's voice on the other end of the call, though I couldn't make out specific words. He noticed me entering and wrapped up the conversation quickly, his expression showing satisfaction with whatever they'd been discussing. "Sarah, how was your day?" The casual question felt surreal given everything that had transpired. He was asking about my day as if I'd had routine project management responsibilities rather than watching my professional identity be systematically dismantled. "Fine," I replied, not trusting myself to say more without revealing the depth of my frustration and hurt. "Jessica's Morrison meeting went extremely well," he continued, either missing or ignoring my subdued response. "They're excited about the expansion opportunities she presented, and they've agreed to increase their budget allocation for the fourth quarter." Expansion opportunity, increased budget allocation. The metrics of success that mattered to Michael were revenue growth and client spending rather than strategic effectiveness or relationship sustainability. "That's good," I said, though I wondered what Jennifer's private thoughts were about the ambitious strategies she'd agreed to fund. Michael moved closer, his expression growing more serious. "Sarah, I know today represented a significant transition for you. Change is always challenging, but I think you'll find that focusing on your operational strengths allows for more satisfying work than trying to manage strategic responsibilities that might not be the best fit." Operational strengths. Strategic responsibilities that might not be the best fit. He was suggesting that my 15 years of successful strategic development had somehow been misaligned with my actual capabilities, that relegation to administrative functions represented better utilization of my skill. "Michael, strategic analysis has been my primary responsibility since we started Pinnacle. Every major client relationship was built on analytical work I developed." His expression showed impatience with what he clearly viewed as resistance to beneficial changes. "Sarah, those historical contributions were valuable, but our growth requires different capabilities now. Jessica brings innovative thinking and fresh energy that can take Pinnacle to the next level. Historical contributions, different capabilities. Fresh energy. Each phrase reinforced the message that my approach to strategic development was outdated, that my role in Pinnacle's growth was finished rather than evolving. What if I disagree with that assessment? I asked directly. The question seemed to surprise him, as if the possibility of my disagreement was unexpected rather than inevitable. Sarah, this isn't really a matter of opinion. Business requirements determine organizational structure, and our current needs require different strategic leadership. Business requirements determine organizational structure. He was presenting Jessica's promotion and my demotion as inevitable responses to market forces rather than personal decisions based on subjective preferences. Michael, what specific business requirements support replacing proven strategic approaches with untested alternatives? His face flushed slightly, showing irritation with questions that challenged his decision-making authority. Sarah, I don't think this conversation is productive. The changes have been made, and continuing to question them isn't helpful for anyone. The changes have been made, continuing to question them isn't helpful. He was establishing that further discussion about my role or Jessica's authority would be viewed as disruptive rather than legitimate professional dialogue. But instead of accepting his dismissal, I felt something shift inside me. The compliance and accommodation that had characterized my response to gradual marginalization was being replaced by clarity about what was actually happening and determination to address it directly. Michael, I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's really driving these organizational changes. His expression grew wary, suggesting he understood that I was approaching topics he'd rather avoid. What do you mean? I mean that Jessica's qualifications and strategic capabilities don't justify the scope of authority she's been given, or the speed with which my role has been diminished. Something else is influencing these decisions. The silence that followed felt charged with unspoken tensions and acknowledgments that neither of us was ready to address explicitly. Michael's face showed a mixture of anger and something that might have been guilt, while I felt the strange relief that comes from finally naming realities that have been carefully avoided. Sarah, I think you're letting professional disappointment cloud your judgment about what's best for Pinnacle's continued success. Professional disappointment clouded judgment. He was characterizing my concerns as emotional reactions rather than analytical observations about questionable business decisions. Michael, my concerns are based on objective assessment of strategic capabilities and client relationship management. Jessica's rapid promotion and my systematic exclusion from strategic responsibilities don't align with performance metrics or business requirements. His anger was becoming more visible now, the careful diplomacy of our earlier conversations giving way to frustration with my persistence. Sarah, these decisions are mine to make as CEO. Questioning my judgment about organizational structure and personnel assignments is inappropriate and counterproductive. My attempt to discuss the logic behind recent changes was being characterized as insubordination rather than legitimate professional dialogue. But I was beyond caring about appropriateness or productivity. Weeks of accumulated frustration and diminished authority had reached a breaking point that demanded honest conversation about what was really happening. Michael, are you having an affair with Jessica? The question hung in the air between us like a confession, naming the reality that had been influencing every organizational decision, while being carefully excluded from official explanations about strategic leadership and fresh perspective. His face went completely white, then flushed red with anger that confirmed my suspicions even before he spoke. How dare you suggest something like that? Jessica is a valued professional colleague whose contributions to Pinnacle's success speak for themselves. Valued professional colleague. Contributions that speak for themselves. The defensive language couldn't disguise the fundamental shift in our relationship that had occurred when Jessica joined the company. Michael, her contributions are 6 months of theoretical strategic analysis that contradicts proven approaches. Her rapid promotion from account representative to chief customer officer bypasses every other qualified candidate on our team. Her rapid promotion reflects exceptional capability and innovative thinking that positions Pinnacle for future growth. Her rapid promotion reflects personal favoritism that's destroying team morale and undermining client relationships built over years of collaborative work. We stared at each other across the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of conversations about business challenges, client successes, and strategic opportunities. But this conversation felt like the end of partnership that had sustained both our marriage and our business for more than 2 decades. "Sarah," Michael said finally, his voice cold and controlled, "I think you need to decide whether you're committed to Pinnacle's success under our new organizational structure, or whether you'd prefer to pursue other opportunities." Other opportunity. He was suggesting that my refusal to accept Jessica's authority and my diminished role might be incompatible with continued employment at the company I'd helped build from nothing. "Are you firing me? I'm asking you to make a choice about your level of commitment to approaches that serve Pinnacle's best interests, rather than protecting your historical role expectation." He was reframing my strategic expertise as nostalgia for outdated responsibilities, rather than valuable capabilities that contributed to client success and business growth. In that moment, standing in our kitchen while my husband threatened my employment for questioning decisions that were clearly based on personal rather than professional criteria, I realized that something fundamental had broken in ways that couldn't be repaired through compromise or accommodation. The partnership that had built Pinnacle was over. The marriage that had sustained our personal relationship was damaged beyond restoration. The professional identity I'd developed over 15 years was being systematically dismantled to make room for someone whose primary qualification was Michael's personal interest. "I understand," I said quietly, though understanding and accepting were entirely different things. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Michael slept beside me, his breathing deep and regular with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully asserted his authority. But I wasn't thinking about compliance or accommodation anymore. I was thinking about choices and consequences, about professional capabilities and personal worth, about the difference between partnership and subordination. For 15 years I had been half of the strategic thinking that built Pinnacle's reputation and client relations. My analytical capabilities, market insights, and client relationship skills had generated millions of dollars in revenue and established the company as a leader in strategic marketing. But my value as a strategic professional existed independently of Michael's recognition or Jessica's approval. The client relationships I'd built, the campaigns I'd developed, the analytical frameworks I'd created, those accomplishments belonged to me regardless of who claimed credit or received authority. As dawn broke over Austin, filtering pale light through our bedroom windows, I realized that I was finished trying to prove my worth to people who were determined not to see it. The question now was what I was going to do with capabilities that were no longer valued at Pinnacle but remained valuable in the broader marketplace. For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. Part 5. The Midnight Awakening. The decision came to me at 3:47 in the morning on a Tuesday that felt like the end of everything I'd built and the beginning of something I couldn't yet imagine. I'd been lying awake for hours, staring at the digital clock on my nightstand while Michael slept soundly beside me, his breathing steady with the contentment of someone whose world was unfolding exactly as planned. But my world was collapsing, and in the strange clarity that comes with absolute exhaustion and complete honesty, I finally understood what I needed to do. I slipped out of bed quietly, padding barefoot to the kitchen where I made coffee in the darkness, the familiar ritual providing comfort in a life that had become unpredictable and hostile. The house felt different at this hour, stripped of daytime pretenses and evening negotiation. In the pre-dawn silence, I could think clearly about choices that daylight conversations and office politics had obscured for months. Jessica Williams had been systematically dismantling my professional life for 6 months, claiming credit for my analytical insights, while positioning herself as the innovative thinker who could take Pinnacle to new levels of success. Michael had supported her ascension not because of superior strategic capabilities, but because of personal dynamics that had nothing to do with business requirements or client needs. I'd spent weeks trying to prove my value to people who were determined not to see it, attempting to maintain strategic authority in an environment where personal favoritism trumped professional competence. But sitting in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, I realized that my efforts to preserve my role at Pinnacle had been fundamentally misguided. The question wasn't how to compete with Jessica for Michael's approval, or how to convince clients that my analytical approach was superior to her ambitious projections. The question was why I was fighting to remain in a situation that had become professionally toxic and personally degrading. I opened my laptop and began researching something I'd been avoiding for months: the legal and practical requirements for starting my own marketing consultancy. The information was surprisingly accessible, from business registration procedures to professional liability insurance options. Austin's business community was large enough to support multiple marketing agencies, and my track record with client relationships provided a foundation for independent practice. As I scrolled through small business administration guidelines and professional service frameworks, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about strategic possibilities and professional challenges. Instead of defending territory I'd already conquered, I could be exploring new opportunities that utilized my capabilities without requiring approval from people who were determined to diminish my authority. The sunrise found me surrounded by printed articles about consulting business development, professional networking strategies, and client acquisition approach. I'd filled several pages with notes about startup costs, revenue projections, and service offerings that could differentiate my approach from larger agencies focused on ambitious growth rather than sustainable strategic development. Michael appeared in the kitchen at 6:30, already dressed for the office and checking messages on his phone. He glanced at the papers scattered across the kitchen table with mild curiosity, but didn't ask about my early morning research project. "You're up early," he observed, pouring coffee from the pot I'd made hours earlier. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, which was both true and massively incomplete. "I've been thinking about professional possibilities outside Pinnacle." The revenge came naturally without planning or malice, simply through the power of reputation and results. 6 months after establishing Chen Strategic Marketing, I received a call that would change everything. Amanda Chen from Meridian Manufacturing was on the line, her voice tight with frustration. "Sarah, I need your help. Our latest campaign has been a disaster, and frankly, we're hemorrhaging clients." It turned out that Jessica's aggressive rebranding strategy had confused their loyal aerospace customers while failing to attract new markets. Within weeks, 3 major accounts had terminated contracts, citing inconsistent messaging that no longer reflected the precision manufacturing expertise they'd trusted for years. The industry trade publications had even run articles questioning Meridian's strategic direction, something that had never happened during my tenure managing their account. Word spread quickly through Austin's tight-knit business community. Davidson Tech called next, reporting similar issues with their healthcare expansion disaster. Mark's voice carried genuine regret as he explained how Jessica's rushed timeline had led to compliance failures that nearly resulted in regulatory penalties. "Sarah, I should have listened to your concerns about the implementation schedule. Now we're facing potential lawsuits and our reputation in cybersecurity is damaged." The financial losses were staggering, over $2 million in projected revenue that evaporated when healthcare clients discovered Davidson wasn't actually prepared to meet industry standards. Maria and I took on both accounts, implementing careful damage control strategies that slowly rebuilt their market credibility through authentic positioning rather than ambitious expansion promise. The final blow to Jessica's reign came when Morrison Industries publicly terminated their Pinnacle contract in a scathing industry letter that circulated throughout Texas business network. Jennifer Walsh had documented every failure of the youth-focused rebranding strategy, showing how campaign costs had tripled while customer engagement plummeted by 60%. Morrison Industries has always prided itself on reliability and proven expertise, the letter stated. Recent marketing efforts that emphasized innovation over substance have fundamentally misrepresented our brand values and confused our customer base. The letter specifically praised our previous collaborative approach, mentioning my analytical methods by name and expressing intention to re-engage Chen Strategic Marketing for future strategic development. Within days, 3 other Pinnacle clients had requested similar contract review. Michael's desperate phone call came on a Thursday evening as I was reviewing quarterly reports that showed Chen Strategic Marketing's revenue had already exceeded my annual Pinnacle salary. His voice lacked its usual confidence, carrying undertones of panic that I'd never heard before. "Sarah, we need to talk. Pinnacle is losing clients faster than we can replace them, and several accounts have specifically requested to work with you instead of our current team." I listened calmly as he explained that Jessica's innovative strategies had resulted in a 40% client retention rate, while industry standards averaged 85%. The financial impact was devastating. Pinnacle's revenue had dropped by nearly half, forcing layoffs and budget cuts that threatened the company's survival. His request was both humbling and desperate. Would I consider returning as Senior Strategic Director with full authority over client relationships and campaign development? My response was swift and decisive. Chen Strategic Marketing provides exactly the strategic consultation that Pinnacle's former clients apparently need. If you'd like to discuss outsourcing arrangements, my hourly consulting rate is 4 times what you used to pay me annually. The silence that followed was profound, filled with recognition that the power dynamic had completely reversed. I was no longer the marginalized employee, seeking approval. I was the successful entrepreneur whose expertise was suddenly invaluable to her former employer's survival. When he asked about the possibility of acquisition, Pinnacle purchasing Chen Strategic Marketing to regain client relationships, I explained that my company's current valuation exceeded his annual revenue. The conversation ended with him requesting a formal proposal for strategic consulting services, a delicious irony that felt like professional poetry. Jessica's resignation came through industry gossip rather than official announcement. Maria heard from a former Pinnacle designer that she'd been quietly let go after the Morrison Industries debacle, with Michael citing strategic misalignment with client needs as justification for her departure. The innovative thinking and fresh perspective that had justified her rapid promotion had proven incompatible with practical marketing requirements and sustainable business growth. Her LinkedIn profile showed a quick succession of short-term positions at various agencies, none lasting longer than 8 months, suggesting that her theoretical approach to strategic marketing consistently failed to generate the measurable results that clients demanded. The young woman who had systematically dismantled my corporate authority was learning that ambitious projections couldn't substitute for analytical expertise and proven methodologies. The industry recognition came gradually but decisively. Austin Business Journal featured Chen's Strategic Marketing in their annual Rising Stars profile, highlighting our client retention rate and revenue growth as exceptional achievements in competitive market conditions. The article specifically mentioned our analytical approach to strategic development, contrasting it with flashier alternatives that prioritize style over substance. Speaking engagements followed with business organizations requesting presentations about sustainable marketing strategies and authentic brand development. The irony wasn't lost on me. The conservative, analytical approaches that Jessica had characterized as outdated thinking were now being celebrated as innovative alternatives to failed aggressive expansion strategies throughout the industry. 2 years later, Pinnacle Digital Solutions filed for bankruptcy protection, unable to recover from the client exodus that had followed Jessica's disastrous strategic leadership. Michael's final message was brief and professional, acknowledging that his personal decisions had destroyed both our marriage and his business. He'd attempted to rebuild with various strategic consultants, but the damage to Pinnacle's reputation proved irreversible once word spread about their systematic pattern of client failure. The company that we'd built together from a small startup was liquidated to pay creditors, its assets and remaining contracts sold to competitors who understood the value of proven analytical approaches over ambitious theoretical projections. The building where I'd spent 15 years developing strategic campaigns now housed a different marketing agency that specifically advertised reliable, results-focused client service. Chen Strategic Marketing eventually acquired Pinnacle's former office space at a bankruptcy auction, renovating the 12th floor to create an environment that reflected our commitment to collaborative strategic development rather than hierarchical corporate structure. Standing in the conference room where Jessica had once presented her ambitious expansion strategies, now redesigned as our client consultation space, I felt profound gratitude for circumstances that had forced me to discover capabilities I'd never fully realized. The woman who had tried to make me invisible had inadvertently provided the catalyst for building professional success that exceeded anything I'd achieved within organizational constraints. My name became synonymous with strategic marketing excellence throughout Texas business communities, proving that analytical depth and sustainable approaches would always outperform flashy presentations and theoretical possibility. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.